Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. Now, I'm really excited to announce our featured leader today and introduce you to Kat Hicks, psychologist for software teams at Catharsis Consulting. Kat, thank you so much for joining me. It's nice to see you.
It's a pleasure. It's not every day you get to talk to an audience that's, in and around the tools that you use every day. So I love that. I work with a lot of developers and their relationships to their tools. So it's really fun to bring it into my world a little bit here.
Wonderful. Well, I would love it if you could introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, but also things that you like to do outside of work.
Well, someone already noticed that I have a harp. It is an Irish lever harp. I've played that since I was 15. This is actually the same harp that I got from my mom, who very generously answered her 15-year-old who came up and said, I have to play harp. I can't explain why, but I just love it. And I need you to buy me this really expensive instrument that nobody plays. And she did. So that's something that I love. I love to write outside of work. I'm a huge fiction writer and reader. In work, I consider myself a research architect. I'm a social scientist by training. I have a PhD in quantitative psychology. I also did a postdoc in computer science and engineering in a design lab. So HCI, kind of human factors stuff, which is a really great place to get into people's relationships with their tools. But very quickly, from even when I was back in academia, I cared a lot about what was happening for people in the real world, in their workplaces, in the classrooms. And so I found myself always pulled towards applied social science, towards doing research projects that I felt put some answers to questions that everyone was kind of asking, but no one was really getting answers to. So in my latest work, I try to do that especially for software developers. So questions like, how can we help software teams thrive? How can we understand their problem solving? How do we break apart old myths about actually how our problem solving works? Because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions out there. So I'm very interested in our networks of beliefs that we hold about how our own minds operate, and also in intervention science. So I've led and built research departments from zero to actually producing, an impactful research agenda, carved out a research department at a company that didn't have one, and have kind of been really interested in the whole logistical side of how do we get good research structures in place, that empower scientists to do creative and good work. That's kind of a really big overview. We can take this in a lot of directions, I'm sure.
Yes, we totally can. And I would love to ask some sort of like context building questions so that we all have a good foundation for figuring out what questions we want to ask you. So, my sort of thing I need help understanding is like, okay, we did the PhD, we moved into some industry roles, and then we did
Mm,
consulting. You decided to like found some stuff, do things on your own.
yes.
What
Yeah.
does Catharsis Consulting help with? Like, what are some of the facets of
Yeah.
work within software teams? Like, is it like, do you help with interpersonal stuff, setting boundaries? Is this much more
Yeah.
oriented towards the tool and user and, relationship?
Yeah, so it's interesting what people assume psychology is and does in the world, because there's a huge, huge discipline with lots and lots of different ways of going about it. I like to tell people I'm not a couch psychologist. I don't do one-on-one work. I'm not even necessarily a feelings psychologist. I'm really much more of a structures of beliefs and behavioral science and team practices psychologist. So with catharsis, I built this research consultancy, I would say 6 years ago now or something like this. And honestly, people will tell you these stories like, oh, yes, I knew since I was a child, that I would do this. I did not have that vision or clarity. What I knew was that everybody kept asking me these questions about doing research or evaluating evidence that I thought were sort of obvious. So I was not to insult anybody, but you don't know what you know sometimes. And I share that just because I think it might be useful for this audience. I It took me a long time to realize the tremendous source of value that research methods and evidence science had in the world. So with Catharsis, I design evidence science with organizations. That's shifted over the years. So I've shifted to focus much more comprehensively on engineering organizations, software organizations. And in part, that's because for the last 3 years, I was also the VP of research for a tech company where I built a research lab that did open science for software teams. So I was able to kind of understand what I even thought about software teams, build an evidence base on which I can now say, now I know what I want to consult on and what kind of interesting and helpful practices I can offer to engineering orgs. So that might look like things like a developer experience team at an engineering company is really excited to try to improve the lives of 2,000 people, and they've gotten budget and they've gotten support from their leaders, and now they have to face the hard work, of picking tools for these people, asking, do we know what actually helps these folks that we're building for? And so these folks might come to me and say, Kat, can you help us design a real world comparison, a real world efficacy study, or even some consulting on the basics of how are we thinking about metrics in our environment? Are we falling into a lot of common pitfalls? That's something I've done some work on as well. There's a lot of misuse, I think, of people's activity data and work data, and I'm really interested in helping prevent some of that misuse.
That's a fascinating topic. We've had so many wonderful people in the people analytics space on the Data
Mm,
Science Hangout recently, and that's always a big question around metrics. Like they are
mm,
fraught. If you're
yeah.
looking for productivity or happiness, or you're trying to predict attrition or whatever, gosh, human beings are complicated. Well, we have so many wonderful questions already in Slido. I would love to jump over and look at some of those. But really quickly, before we get started, I forgot to say that Kat is giving a keynote at the Posit conference. Like, hello, that's a really big deal. We're really excited about it. Kat, could you give us a little preview of what you hope to talk about in your keynote?
Yeah. My keynote is about the psychology of technologists. So I'm writing a book right now that's trying to translate big, important ideas from psychology and from what we know about our core psychological needs at work and bring it a little bit into the workplace of knowledge workers. So I hope to puncture some of the misconceptions that y'all probably have had to encounter in your lives, and also, I say the simplest thing I like to say is I hope this will be a book that practitioners will pick up and want to give to their boss and say, hey, please consider this. And in it, there's an interweaving of, rich empirical science, but also a lot of the lived experience of practitioners. So questions like, what helps us feel creative? What creates a culture where we can build coalitions in our workplaces rather than start to devolve into, in group, out group, and what kind of beliefs about technical workers again are sort of holding us back. So questions like, you know, are happier people actually productive? My answer to that is usually yes. So we'll cover in that keynote, I think, how I've tried to set out a research agenda and do open science for technology teams, which I think is a bold new frontier that needs a lot more investment in it. Um, yeah, and I'm really happy with what we're going to talk about on stage. So come to the conference.
Ah, I'm excited too. I mean, I think a lot of people here work in a development capacity, even if we're not software
Mm,
developers,
yeah.
in a data science development capacity. And it feels really comforting to know that there's somebody out there who's sort of looking out for us and has our backs
Mm.
and who understands like the things that we might be struggling with. And we have a lot
Mm,
of people here who are in people leadership roles. So I'm sure they're looking forward to that too. I wanted to
yeah.
share in the chat Kat's newsletter. So if you're interested in like hearing from Kat and when the book comes out, maybe you'll hear something that way. Uh, you can go check out fightforthehuman.com. I put that in the chat. But let's hop over to Slido, where we already have lots of questions and people have been voting. Um, okay. So we are going to jump right into an AI question with Mike. Mike,
Sure.
would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Mm,
So the answer to this question isn't, well, it's not specifically about AI, but um, and the answer might be, oh, come to the keynote. But the question was something like, there are a lot of teams going through change, whether that's increasing use of open source or embracing AI tools and that
mm,
kind of thing. Do you have any tips on how to objectively assess whether, how that change is going and the kind of
yeah.
comfort level within teams?
Can you tell me what you mean when you say objectively assess?
Well, it seems that I kind of lead a group, right? And I see big groups undergoing this change.
Hmm.
And a lot of times you kind of get the people who actively hate something will tell you it. People who
Mm,
love something, you can tell they love it because they're quiet and they're diligently getting on with the new thing. There's a kind of bit in the middle, and it's hard to assess the overall feeling of, is this going well? Do I need to engage more? Or are the bulk of people more or less happy with this?
okay. Okay. So it sounds like there's two questions here. Let me know if you think I'm wrong about this. One is, let's talk about evaluating AI. Second is, let's talk about how sometimes we're unevenly sampling from our environment, from the people we want to understand. How do I make sure I'm like comprehensively evaluating people's experiences about AI? Something like that. Okay, I see you nodding.
Um, well, I think actually the thing I'm more leaning towards is the second bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
So
cool.
so
Let's start with that.
yeah.
Because that's like a precondition for the next question, right? So I care a ton about this. There's a chapter in my book which I haven't written yet, but I'm excited to write it, called "Designing an Organization That Wants to Understand Itself." And I think it's a huge freaking question. So I'm just like right off the bat gonna say we're not gonna answer all of it. But like if you're struggling with this, Mike, send me an email because I care about this. I'm trying to understand it myself. I think we can all think about places and orgs that have truly cared about trying to get our insight. And that feels really different, right, than the HR engagement survey that comes to you and you're like, what's going to happen? Is my right? Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to? So, the advice I give when I'm doing evidence strategy work with leaders like you is maybe the biggest thing you can start to do is create buy-in from people, to trust that your evidence gathering moment is actually a good one. And this is a big thing that social scientists care about. We care about research design, but we actually deeply care about sampling and selection. And have I created a situation in which the information is actually even going to be given to me? And that I'm clearing out of people's way the very understandable, sometimes strategic, important to them reasons that they would give me inaccurate information. So a classic example of this is good information travels a lot faster in organizations than bad information. Of course it does, because there's like this huge freaking cost all the time. Like you have to, if you're a brave person who's going to bring up the bad news, you still have to think about it more than you have to think about the good information. So when you think about that moment of data collection in your organization, what have you done to right up front create trust for people to tell you about their AI experiences? What have you also done if there's somebody needs to make it worth their while, they don't care about AI, they don't care about the decision you care about, what do they care about? So I frequently advise leaders that we need to actually have like a holistic evidence, like data gathering strategy, particularly in my case with the developers they might be working with. You stop asking them like there's five managers and they're each asking five different things and it's kind of disjointed. We actually have to come together, form a coalitional evidence research strategy. AI is a pretty good wedge in for this because everybody's kind of freaked out about it. But then say, let's do some co-design. I've done this a lot. This has been really successful. Ask the developers, what do you all care about? We'll have a space on the survey or a space on the thing for this, and like those kind of combinations will often elicit the engagement from the sort of middle of the road people or the disengaged people. I don't know if this is a good enough answer for you. It's a high level answer, but that question of creating engagement is something where we have behavioral mechanisms we can pull on. And we don't have to pull on them in a manipulative way. Like I tell people completely straight up, I know that some of you find these surveys annoying. I know you might, wonder what we're going to do with it. So I'm going to tell you exactly my plan. I'm going to tell you I got your leadership to actually commit. If we find things in this direction, we're going to do X. If we find things in this direction, we're going to do Y. And then you can have people who are all over the spectrum, like horse race, betting on their outcome, feeling engaged. And what you've done is created that org that's interested in understanding itself, right? And another little tip I'll say is leaders do not, they really underestimate the how much people are curious about themselves and how much people actually want something that feeds back to them. So we in my scrappy little research lab got incredible participation from public developers who were getting no money from our research, nothing, and they participated in it in part because in every research project we baked in that we were going to send them some like scientific guidance to help them in their careers. And they were going to get it immediately, like as an email right after they finished the survey. And, we were out there a little bit like intimidated. These are people with really sky high salaries, very, we can't really offer them an amount of money that's going to make sense to them. Are they going to care about our little guidebook, about overcoming anxiety? Boy, they did, So if you can offer that care somehow, you will become the person who really has this superpower to unlock engagement.
This is wonderful. Thank you. I think that the what you said about, like, let me tell you what I'm going to do with this information if it goes this way or that way
Yeah.
is sort of the heart of a data scientist's
Yeah,
conversation that they have with stakeholders. Like, okay,
totally.
you want this thing. If I make you this thing and it tells you this, what are you going to do with that to kind of get to the heart of what they actually need? So I think if somebody came to me as a data scientist and said, I'm going to turn that back to you and give you that same power and that buy-in to whatever is happening, I would feel so respected. Um,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that this is good. It ties in with community building for me too. Like give people the ownership.
I agree. There's a lot of current intervention science really emphasizes interventions are done with people, not on people. This is like a classic quote. Like you can't control other people. And if you try, you're in the land of being a surveillance asshole or something, pardon my, but you're in a completely different land. And like I have seen the world of software can be very acrimonious. I mean, people yell at me all the time, and
Oh
yet
no.
you can no it's it's my cross to bear, but but you can still really change people by saying we're gonna respect each other. We may violently disagree about how we should measure progress in software, but let us try to respect each other. Let us break down the disagreement, and it really does go far.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is truly a cathartic situation, and it's so funny that your company is called Catharsis.
That
Um,
was part of the thinking, yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for that wonderful question. Um, and I have a few questions here that I can choose from. I really liked Yulia's question when it popped up, so I would love it if she could unmute and ask hers. Can I find Yulia to help her unmute or reach out to her?
Hi,
Hey.
can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so my question relates to most of us devs are embedded in teams that are embedded in bigger organizations. And I'm really curious about how much of this developer thriving comes from your immediate team versus the larger organization. Because sometimes you have an kick-ass team and a kind of iffy organization, or a kind of so-so team, but a really
Yeah.
cool organization.
Yeah, yeah. This is a very impossible to answer question, but I'm going to tell you what I think is interesting about it. And maybe it's just going to be like more questions you could ask to try to like assess your particular answer. It depends on how much the organization affects the team, right? So, there's an interaction there that's really important to pay attention to. So I would think if I was giving advice like to my little brother or something, probably knowing nothing else, I would say, pick the good team, I guess. You know, however, make sure there aren't enormous things you need in life, safety, career that are gated on the organization. So, for instance, organization gated decisions tend to be how much you get paid, or, you know, um, certain career opportunities that are very important and maybe more or less important depending on the relative power you bring into the org. However, the team is like who talks to you every day. And so that is viscerally, immediately constant psychological feedback, psychological environment. And they really are not terribly separate. So, like, how much could a good team really persist in a super bad org? My questions would be, what makes the org bad? Like, in what way do we see it being bad? Is it bad in the normal way that large collections of people can be very frustrating? Or is it bad in that it's creating very negative incentive cycles that are eventually going to degrade and make your otherwise good team kind of resilient, not resilient, make them fragile and break down? So these are like really deep, hard questions to answer. That's the way I would start to scope my answer to that question.
That is really tough. Yulia, thank you for that amazing question. This is something, if I can chime in, that I, over the years of my life, have noticed is that sometimes a red flag for me when I'm interviewing at a company and I'm talking to other people who work there is if anyone says, well, your experience really depends on the team you're on, if you're on a good team or a bad team. And I'm like, wait, hold on. That's not a
Yeah.
great feeling for me because, teams change and leadership changes and things move around. So if you join someplace that you could very quickly be on a different team that's not as good. It worries
Yeah.
me.
It is a sign of potentially a lack of accountability in the culture, maybe an uneasy culture or an unstable culture. And you got to think about, well, what's going on in this? Or, I two pieces of advice I would give, which are at opposite ends to any person in their career. One is just mindfulness about you. Have people outside of your work that you can talk to who will really honestly tell you, this place is affecting you in a way that's over the line. Like, you got to get out of there. And wherever that's coming from, I think that we all need that feedback sometimes. The second part is developing your macroeconomic sense, actually. I find a lot of technologists, and like, bless you all, but as someone who's had to be a VP of research and do budget and argue in front of boards and talk to the CEO, a lot of folks really check out from the larger economic forces that are determining the possibilities their organization can see. And some of that can just, a little bit of that can be really helpful. Like, if you're at a place that's fundamentally in its economics not going to invest in innovation, you're going to be facing a lot of headwinds every time you're that person who's trying to get people excited about doing a new technological approach. Maybe you need to think about the industry, the place you're in, the larger forces that you're just one person, and these are like large market forces that we all have to contend with. So that's also a piece of my advice.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's head over to Slido and find another amazing question. Um, there was one that has a ton of votes. It's an anonymous question. Whoever asked this, hi. Thanks for asking your question. It says, I work in a remote multidisciplinary team where colleagues don't really understand each other's roles and
Mm.
interactions often feel transactional. So, what
Mm.
strategies can help foster psychological safety by improving understanding and empathy in such a team and help bring that team together? I really like this
Hmm.
question.
I like this question too. I've been in this place.
I was going to
I've
say, I've been there too.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear other people chime off as they, or answer this in the chat too. I mean, I think that you can develop your little strategy, your little test balloons for whether or not people are um gonna pick up your bid for increasing the team culture, and they might not, but there's a concept in relational. I just said I wasn't a couch psychologist, but I do love clinical psych. I like to learn from those people. There's a concept in like relationship psychology of making a bid for attention, and how we make these conversational bids all the time. And we might say, hey, look, I saw that cool bird, and if somebody answers your bid, it's kind of like in an improv skit, right? They're like, oh, cool, all right, they yes and you, and really part of the information that's being conveyed is we're allowed to take a moment and have shared attention. You're not just an object to me. Like, I care about your perspective. I'm gonna stand side by side with you. Um, people reject bids, and that feels like social rejection, right? Because it is social rejection. You get into a meeting and you share something a little vulnerable about your day or how hard you're working, and people are like, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, agenda item 2. You are receiving like an implicit message that that's not what we do here. So that's important information. Like, it might be accurate information that people will not receive your bid. However, it also could be they feel like stuck on the other side of this plane of glass of like, no one wants me to waste, time. I had a manager one time in my first tech job, which was at Google, which was really scary for me, and I presented all this stuff to very high level people. And my manager gave me this feedback that was like not a compliment, where she said, Kat, you really don't care what title somebody has. Like, if you're talking about data and evidence, you just treat everybody the same. And I was like, yeah, because that's a great thing about me. And she was like, no, it's not a great thing about you, actually, that we don't want that here. But I remember I got feedback one time that I spent too long saying thank you for a compliment that somebody gave me. That kind of thing was just, okay, we have to be transactional here. This is, I don't have the room to create a different culture. However, I've moved on from there, and I think there are a lot of times in cultures where we might try to tell other people, again, I'm trying to do something a little different. Or even like, do you guys ever feel like we never get to know each other as people? And a way in I find that's often really fun is through talking about the process of work. So rather than jumping just straight into, tell me how you feel, which might be very scary for people and put them a little on the spot. You could be a little bit like, hey, do you want to do like a retro about our communication or our collaboration or how we find creativity in this work? Like a little bit of a toward the psychological safety, but through the lens of work, which people often find like less challenging and a little more like, oh, you can also bring up shared values. That has a huge impact on people. Bringing up, because we all love to learn, like, because, I know this team wants to have a good learning culture. I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to, and kind of do a little bit of modeling that you want something that's not transactional. I hope that helps as some tips.
I mean, it helps me. I didn't ask the question, but I feel like I just got a lot of answers that I have been looking for. Um, I really, I get
Mm.
that same feedback, Kat. I've been told, you don't seem to see hierarchy. You just talk to people like they're people. And I'm like, are they not people? I'm pretty sure they're
Mm.
people. We're just all human beings, right? I do get intimidated by people still. I am still nervous if there's somebody that I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of
Mm.
yours. I was nervous talking to you today. Um,
Mm.
but we're all people. All right, anonymous question asker. That was an amazing question. Thank you for asking it. Let's go find another great question. I wanted to touch on Marcos's question because it talks about one of your recent podcasts, and I think it's a great topic. Marcos, if you're available to unmute, could you ask your question?
I'm here.
Hey.
There I am. Hi, Kat. We actually exchanged a blue sky interaction about your podcast,
Nice.
which is my claim to fame for today. But yeah, I similarly, I mean, it seems like you had a visceral reaction to this paper, and I not just from your podcast, but the social media posts to me
Yeah.
on Mastodon and on Blue Sky. And I
I let
certainly,
myself be a little bit of a demon for a minute there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm no stranger to this. I famously get triggered, especially about astrology things, and I wrote
Mm.
a whole blog post about some 4-year-old like news article recently. But
Mm.
anyway, is there another like this one clearly triggered you, and you wanted to get not enough triggered the right word, but clearly got you excited, and you wanted to get kind of the truth out there. And has this happened to
Yeah.
you before? Has there been like in the last few years? Has there been another kind of weird, maybe about psychology or maybe about something else that you're like, oh, this is people are not interpreting this
Yeah.
paper right. Like I need to get the word
Yeah.
out. I need to get the truth out about this.
Yeah. 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 Thank you. It's such an interesting framing for this question too. Like, I appreciate that you brought in some context of how my work. I I try to strategically pick when I do this. I don't know if I've 100% figured it out, because I think you can't just be a crank all day long. Then you're not producing anything. And also it makes you a depressed person. I think it's bad for you. But I was joking with one of my friends that this is like crank summer for me. I'm like, you know what? I'm in a transition phase right now in my work. I just want to be like little cranky demon a little bit. An example that comes to mind is you probably all heard it. There's a really pervasive idea, trope, myth, phrase that people use where they talk about 10x developers or 10x engineers or 10x whatever. Um, this comes from a number of places, but there's like a particular 1968 case study where like the estimate, the like I was asking myself, where did this 10x like come from, besides the fact that it just sounds good. It's nice to say 10 or something. It's a round number. I think it came from this 1968 case study, because it's quoted in a really influential book, a book in software that's been really influential called The Mythical Man Month, which is by Fred Brooks. It's really uncritically quoted. I like have a personal vendetta against this 1968 paper. I think it's so dumb. I think it was just overextended. It's a really strange little lab task, and it makes these extremely sweeping like generalizations. And it essentially says, wow, people who do programming are going to be really expensive, so we should find the few people in the world who are going to be good at it. It uses like the time people took to complete the task as its measure of whether people are good at programming or not, which is like a very simplistic measure. Like people can take the same amount of time to solve something and be solving it with completely different strategies. And so you could have a good or a bad outcome look the same in the numbers. And also, it just does bad math. So like it doesn't account for the idea of individual variance, which is something I'm really interested in as how I have a background in learning. So I got to like explode this paper a couple of times, actually talk about it in my book. I got to give a talk about it to a software audience and sort of talk about myths about cognition. And it was super gratifying and fun because so many people sent me private little messages that were like, this stuff always made me feel really, really bad, and I was always, I had a bully in my workplace who used this kind of I'm a 10x developer and you're not, thing against me. So that was like very emotionally gratifying to me. And it was also like a little bit of extending empowerment to people like, listen, you're a smart person. You get to read science. You don't have to like, the 1960s, we thought all kinds of bananas things in the 1960s. We didn't let women into college in that year in a lot of places. So that was a very fun conversation for me.
This whole conversation is fun for me. I really enjoy talking about this stuff. So I'm going to go check out that podcast. Marcos did share it in the chat. If anybody's who's interested.
I will say, sorry, Libby, I'll just say too, I've actually explicitly done some work on the kind of cultures, like what I call contest cultures and brilliance beliefs in technology teams. And that might be of a lot of interest to some of y'all, given the shape of things that are coming up. I think more work needs to be done. I have an observational study on this that I really like, and I'm really interested in it. So that's my AI skill threat paper, actually.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll have to go find a link. All right, cool. Awesome. Marcos, thank you for the question. We have about 20 minutes left and lots more questions. We are not going to be able to answer all of them, but hopefully we can transfer this conversation to social media, continue talking about some of these things on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. So let me hop over to Slido here and see if I can find another good question. Bear with me as I read through some questions here. Jeremy has a question. Jeremy, are you available to unmute and ask that? I will highlight it here in Slido for us.
Oops. Yep, I'm here. Yes. So I'm also a former applied psychologist turned engineer. I particularly was interested in your paper on developer thriving because I used to study group information processing, group decision making, and in kind of classic group decision-making literature, there's these hidden profiles that kind of emerge when we have information spread across team members, but not everybody kind of shares what they know. So the group ends up making a worse decision than any one person could have. And so it's kind of this common problem that emerges in a lot of these contexts. And so I was really interested in that visibility component you mentioned. So I was wondering if you looked at any maybe interventions that maybe explicitly scaffold kind of information exchange, maybe like, I don't know, rotating like a Delta rotator or something.
God, I wish I had been able to. Yeah, and like let's talk sometime if you ever, because I'm actively piloting and thinking about interventions within the constraints of what I have money to do right now and stuff like that. But I think that software and technologists more generally, technical teams need this kind of work. Like it's a great question. Dev Thriving project was really scrappy, really observational. I think we acknowledge it in the small IEEE software paper that we ultimately published with it, but we're kind of like, look, we need help developing more items. You know, I was really proud of it as like planting a flag, like more things matter for developers and for their productivity, you know, than some of what we talk about. But I think there's 1,000 questions provoked by this and 1,000 points in which these psychological models need to be brought in. So, you know, I'll just say some things that might be relevant here about information exchange. One thing that we did was we looked at code review anxiety, which is, of course, an internal problem for people in their experience, but it's also an information exchange problem inside of an organization. And I make that connection because, you know, we see people engage in avoidance behaviors. Like they check out of a code review. They're not going to bring up the hard thing. They're wondering who their interlocutor is. You know, so there's a lot of information exchange and dyadic, you know, group level questions in that area. So we have built out like a tiny plank, like a little foundation, simply by saying, well, here's an empirically tested model for code review anxiety, which was important to us to get out. And this is a published paper with empirical software engineering. You might like it. It's an intervention study. Our excellent lead author, Carol Lee, who's a clinical psychologist, led that intervention, but it wasn't specifically looking at group effects or dyad effects, although I believe group effects happened because of it. And because of things like making the psychological needs of the exchange more visible. We also have a toolkit paper follow-up. We sent people home with a toolkit. There's that engagement I was talking about. And they used it in their actual workplaces, code reviews, and reported back to us at least a lot of positive effects and interesting stories. So there's like lots to build on. Like I hope group researchers like you maybe someday find a path inward to help. We always talked about wanting to do dyadic pairs or something like that, bring in a developer and their manager, you know, like that kind of thing is I'm really interested in, but this is just throwing a lot at you, but yeah.
No, that's really great. I mean, even this sparks ideas. I mean, I'm even thinking like, even like in those code reviews, like one major thing that's missing that might even help with some of that anxiety is just like, we rarely see the intent of the person who's submitting the review, right? So, I mean, even just being understood before going into that review.
Yeah, totally. And we focused on kind of like the thinking traps and the cognitive distortions that might be happening for the individual, right? Where they're sort of like, if I mess up in a code review, I will get fired. I mean, it's just the most wonderful quotes in this study as well. Like I remember one person said like panic voice in my head screaming, you know, like that's the level. But the other side of the story is super interesting, and something I'm interested in as well is what you probably know this, like what we call like intra-group, not just intergroup, but like how group members are themselves talking about the norms of the group and sort of working out this is who we are here and this is what we're doing here. And also, I don't know if you know like the normative descent model from Dominic Packer. So
that was my area.
Jeremy, we got to talk shop. Like So I think all of this is really interesting for teams and has like rarely been studied with specifically in the context of technical teams, and it's like really helpful for us. Yeah.
Yeah, we should definitely talk. This is I'm very excited. Yeah, this is great. Thank
Yay.
you.
All right, you two need to get together on Blue Sky or LinkedIn afterwards. Jeremy, thank you so much for asking your question. And Mike had asked in the chat, like, hey, is there a link to that? I did put a link in there. And I will share that one more time. This is a link to the code review anxiety paper called Understanding and Effectively Mitigating Code Review Anxiety, and then also the code review anxiety workbook that was mentioned.
I should just say too, Carol Lee is on the job market right now, and she is incredible. So
Awesome. Wonderful. All right, let's head over to the other question that I really, really liked when it popped up in Slido, Arsenis's question. Arsenis, are you available to ask live?
Yeah, thanks, Libby. Hi.
Hey.
Um, and thank you, Kat, for joining us today. Really, really cool discussion. My question is maybe a little bit a little bit broader and not so specific, but it's about organizations in general. And the question is, are there ways that organizations can balance the approach to creating culture between like a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach? Which can really change team dynamics and even intra-team or inter-team dynamics within the organization. So yeah, wondering if you might if you have some thoughts or if
yeah, boy. So, I think that when I think about organizations that I feel have unlocked, because they understand how people work and they're not treating people like little robots or something and getting into the common pitfalls of organizations. I think about places that recognize what leaders actually have power over and what is actually within the remit of leaders, and also what is best appropriate to be bottom up. And I often find we flip those. Like we do, I mean, at least in my world, this might be different in the context of y'all's industries or companies, but in the world of the engineering orgs I work with, boy, they love top-down tool mandates. I mean, come on. You have like the world's most, people who love what they do, people who are very passionate about exploring new technologies, people who are like they're so invested in it, they're testing new tools in their evenings and weekends, and then you're not seeing that as a source of information. Like and maybe I mean, I work with a lot of platform engineering, infrastructure, DevX teams where someone really does care really, really hard about the experience of these people, but then they're elevated to a position in the org where they're told to become a decision maker in that top-down mandate, and then they're not given any tools or time or budget to do like maybe user research with their own population. I find that absurd and also like very low-hanging fruit for a leader to fix, actually. So I think about the information loops organizations are leaving on the ground, that could inform and make it not so much a top-down mandate, but actually like a solution to the need that your organization has been voicing to you. And we can't like meet everybody, or I'm not a fan of satisfaction measures for this reason, because I think you can get tyranny of the majority, and I think we need better practices of understanding what our technical people are truly doing and finding and figuring out and working. And this is also a place where on the bottom up side, if we've all experienced this, if you are in an organization that truly has a learning culture and is like valuing and celebrating teams sharing and like powering each other up, this is what I'd call a cumulative culture. That is a place that will be more innovative constantly, but it's really scary and hard to let people do that because it looks worse before it looks better, because it looks like people make a lot of mistakes. It looks like chasing a lot of dead ends. This is in the nature of innovation. Like culture level scholars who compare innovation patterns across societies tell us this. You have to let people jitter and pursue lots of solutions and then kind of get to the one that wins out, and you have to allow that process to happen. I think we're bad at allowing that process to happen. It's a big question, so I have big answers, but that's one. I think I think also like just taking stock of like the really easy wins in the environment around this, like where has the leadership blown up people's trust with some mandate that was bad for them? And I often work with teams that want to make the cost visible to their leaders, the cost of like a failed initiative visible to their leaders, orgs that can do a little bit of repair. Again, it's like creating that organization that wants to understand itself. Orgs that can say, we did kind of mess up with how we did this. Boy, they get a huge amount of credit, graciousness, patience from their people, simply by having that collective humility, which is a concept I find really, really important for organizations as well. Yeah, we could do a whole session on this.
We totally could. And that sort of humility in the face of mistakes or learning opportunities is something that I actually look for when I interview people. So one of my interview questions is often like, tell me about a time you really messed up and you had to tell a bunch of people about it. Because if they are like, I've never done that, I'm like, well, maybe that's not a great thing. Tell me about, the power that you can find in
Yeah.
admitting mistakes and stuff, because there's a lot there.
I'll tell you too. I mean, I've been a VP. I've been like a high level VP of research. I've been the only woman in the room a lot of the time. Leaders are people, like, and leaders are caught up in a lot of unhealthy status games. I'm not saying this, I'm just saying this in general. Like, and there's a lot of psychology going on there to who we allow to succeed and who we allow to become leaders. So, I think that can be really frustrating, scary, and hard, but we all have some power to elevate people around us and think, am I letting the compassionate people get promoted as data scientists in my org? I mean, leaders come from our technical worlds, and it was very hard for me to become a leader, really hard. So y'all can make it easier by valuing more diverse people.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. We have time for at least one more question. And Joey, I really enjoyed your question. I think it's going to send us in a positive direction. If you're available to unmute and ask that, I'd love that.
Yeah. Hey, Kat, thanks for hanging out with us. Just for context, I'm like a mid-senior individual contributor, and I work in the federal government.
Ooh.
So I'm wondering if you can speak to what staff at my level can do. So I don't have a lot of real power. I'm matrixed into a lot of parts of the org, but I don't have a lot of I'm not a senior leader. I don't have a lot of formal authority. What can staff at my level do to like sow positive seeds into a culture
Hmm.
that has really been through a lot? I mean, morale
Hmm.
is like pretty low. I think it's fair to say
Hmm.
everyone's like, it's like a weird culture. So everyone's been through a whole bunch, but I want to help. Everyone wants to help. Don't know what to do because I don't have a lot of real
Yeah.
power. Sorry, can you just like speak into that?
This is bringing tears to my eyes. I have a friend at NOAA. I have friends at the NSF. Like, this is a really hard time. I think about the wisdom that comes to us from communities that have had to create their own safety in circumstances we could hardly imagine. So, you know, there's a theory I like called the stereotype inoculation theory. I think it's by Dasgupta, and it's about how you're the only minority in an organization that is an experience of extreme threat all the time, and like bias all the time. However, she explored what happens for people where they form their own little group and how that can inoculate you against some of the damage and against the feeling of what they're telling me is who I am, because it's really, really hard for us to not internalize that stuff. I mean, maybe this sounds really obvious, but you know, we do internalize, it changes our view of ourselves to being in an environment that's dysfunctional. So I think about protection. Where does protection come from? And we do have incredible mechanisms that we use. And these are often where people who are capable of that cultural change comes from. There's another area I look into about reaffirmation, like affirming the self. Like self affirmation is sort of a psych buzzword in like pop airport books, but it's actually like a really beautiful concept. And the concept actually means, can you firm up yourself, you know, in a space, in a world that's so difficult, in like all the insults and injuries of human life. And there are ways, one way is accessing support outside. But people can do this to themselves. So you can dialogue with yourself, actually. This is where a lot of talk therapy helps you do this. Journaling helps people to do this because you can kind of firm up the self and say, am I replicating the messages of the environment to myself? Or do I know I have something higher, transcendent, really meaningful? No matter what storm is on the surface of this ocean, I have that certainty and no one can touch it because, they're not at that level with me. I can't do a clinical session here, but those are the directions I would like look at, go into, think about, take inspiration from, try to bring to my colleagues. I have friends who have navigated scary, scary situations, and a lot of navigating that and protecting yourself comes back to, who am I talking to right now? How can we be good to each other right now? This 10 minutes of coffee, this 15 minutes where I say I'm not transactional with you. Like, I really care about your soul and your well-being. Look, organizations, institutions shift. My ancestors were immigrants who had to leave behind huge identities for themselves, completely remake their identities, and just knowing that there is a legacy, actually. There's a legacy we can learn from around all of this. So, maybe kind of making your identity not so much about being a federal worker, but about being something else, something that's more lasting and more powerful and bigger than an institution that might be failing you right now. That's kind of some thoughts. And we're here to, I care about you. So
That was
Thank you.
extremely helpful. I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Joey, for that wonderful question. Well, we have 1 minute left, and we might go a minute over. I'm so sorry. If anybody needs to jump, feel free to jump. Kat, thank you so much. I wanted to see if I could fit in one more quick question, because there was an anonymous question
Cool.
that basically said, like, hey, I take on these long-term high impact projects, and people who are involved in my projects see my impact, my value, but across the wider company, I might be seen as unproductive because my work isn't always visible. So, are there any
Yeah.
tips on how to get noticed without being performative? And I love this question because I feel the same way.
Y'all, be performative, okay? I'm sorry. Like, performance is here for a reason. I don't mean not be yourself. Find your own way. I mean, I'm reacting because I have worked with so many highly conscientious people who get pulled into this sort of situation. And there is a funny effect in psychology, like really high efficacy people who are incredibly good at solving hard to solve things, sometimes trap themselves in less productive routes because they're so high self efficacy. Sorry, you know. And I'm sorry if I hope it's not sounding harsh. I hope this is coming with like big sister energy in a way, which I try to bring to my team. But like, listen, you can have a goal of being the most conscientious person who's cleaning up everybody's stuff at the org. That could be your goal. And if that's your goal, you should decide what matters to you besides explicit recognition, because you won't ever get it. And that is a choice that some people I respect truly make, and they decide, I'm in a care role and this is what I'm going to do, and it's never quite going to be understood. And understanding and support is going to come from outside of my job, and it's going to come from a community of peers. It's going to come from joining an infrastructure community where we all get to talk about. And however, I am an ambitious person, and I want to see more people like us succeed. So I encourage those of us who can do this or want to do this to get strategic about performing. This is a game where there are rules that you can learn, and you can learn how to make this kind of work more visible. And that's actually some of what I've worked on. I've worked with nonprofits to say, I know you all have this rich, beautiful, incredible health intervention workshops you're doing in the community, and it's impossible to distill it down into dollars saved. I don't care. Like, I care about you to go do your work, but in this room that we're going to have with the city council, we must come in with dollars. We must, and making it a strategic game that we can win, a weapon that they can use, learning those skills. It's not something we should be ashamed of. It's not something that takes away from the authenticity of our work. Maybe it's something where you need to find a partner who's really good at it. Like, I considered myself as a VP of research. Part of my job was being a scientist. Then the whole big part of my job was, being being this person who was scrapping and fighting for budget all the time and saying our research work really connects to ROI, really connects to values. Oh, and final tip, make the cost visible constantly. Like, constantly say, you are not doing this thing you should. I'm saving you millions of dollars. Here's exactly what would happen if I stopped doing this work. Here's what would happen if I stopped doing this work. And I advise people to, not do the shrinking violet. I guess I kind of did this thing and it was super helpful. And in your, actually that you helped like thousands of people or whatever extraordinary thing you did, backing away from that is a disservice to like all the young people who are going to come after you. Right. So that's how I think about it.
Fantastic advice. Oh my gosh, this is so good. Rachel and I actually in our one-on-one started implementing a brag document where we write down things that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done them, which has been really helpful every week for me to think about. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying a few minutes late with Kat and I and Rachel. This was a whole lot of fun. Kat, thank you so much.
A pleasure. I look forward to the conference.
Yes. Okay, everybody, look forward to Kat's keynote. Go find her on LinkedIn, go find her on Blue Sky, follow her newsletter. And when this gets onto YouTube, there will be all the resources linked in that YouTube description. So all of the things that we shared here, paper, podcast, all of that stuff. And if you are looking for them, you could also, drop me a comment somewhere on LinkedIn. I'll send them to you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you are interested in saving the chat where all of these great resources kind of got pasted in, there's little 3 dots that lets you, top right of the chat. It'll allow you to save the chat, keep it forever. Thank you for joining us. We will see you.
Reminder, we do have a summer break for the next 2
Yes.
months. I just want to make sure we say that. I'll put it in the waiting room. So just in case you join again, next week, you'll see that too.
Yes. And the registration process, if there have been any problems, let us know. Let us know if you've hit any. Oh, Ozan just said, I thought this started at 1 p.m. Eastern. No, it starts at noon. Ozan, we missed you for today, but we'll see you in a few weeks. Next 2 weeks are off for the July 4th holidays. And then we have Ross at Roche. So excited to talk with Ross. And I really look forward to seeing you all again. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you so much, Kat.